Hello, everybody, and welcome to GoIndieNow's live panel discussion. Tonight, our topic is going to be on world building. I know for a lot of us, when you think of world building, your mind jumps to sci-fi and fantasy, and the greats at it, like Tolkien and Herbert, and but it's equally important in every story that we tell. And because details sell authenticity and realism, and I think that's very important. So I want to start by introducing myself. I'm the host. My name is Joe Compton, and you are watching, obviously, on my channel, Go Indie Now. And I am the author of Amongst the Killing, amongst other things. And I'm going to ask, why don't we just go down the line here? Jimmy, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Jimmy Lee Combs. I am writer, director, and producer at Heart and Fire Productions, do editing and cinematography as well. Current projects are Terror Tales, which is a horror anthology film, and also a horror comedy web series called Bored as Hell.
Mr. Jinakubo?
Hello, my name is Gino Kubo. I'm a romance writer. I wrote the story Love. I wrote the story called In Love's Shadow. I also write fantasy. My urban fantasy just came out last week, and I'm actually working right now on a movie script. So that's me.
Awesome.
Awesome. Mr. Joshua Robertson?
Hey everyone, my name is Joshua Robertson. I am the owner of Crimson Edge Publishing and a dark fantasy author, the bestseller of Malcorca. Recently just had, I think, my 9th release of my short story, Jack Sprat. Very excited to be here with you tonight, Joe.
Awesome.
Looking forward to the discussion.
Awesome. Yeah, this is going to be a good one. And Miss Marnie?
I'm Marnie Kate. I'm the author. Don't laugh at me. I'm a young adult fantasy author. I have 2 books out in my series. I'm working on my 3rd one. And I'm just working on books right now.
Awesome.
Trying to get my story out to everyone.
Very cool. So what do we think, guys? Is every story, is the details, and is it important for world building to establish details and sell authenticity and realism to our consumers? Is that something that we think is very important?
Absolutely, I think so. Just on a film aspect, and doing, as an example, an 80s period piece for one of the segments in Terror Tales, the authenticity to me is really, really important to recapture the 80s from the clothing down to the original score that we're going to have. That's going to have an 80s kind of synthesized vibe to it. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very important, especially when you're trying to sell a period piece like we're trying to do with the 80s, and we've gone to like vintage clothing stores and things like that to get the actual clothes that were worn in the 80s, and the and thrift stores, and of course doing a lot of research on my end, seeing what the styles were, the fashions, things like the leg warmers, accessories, all that stuff, and it really pays off. And even set building an 80s video store, making sure everything is pre 89. And things like that in the video store, and what the technology was like, and the phones back then. And so it's really cool, and it really pays off when you pay that attention to detail, as you've seen in the photos, Joe, the production stills.
Yeah, I would agree with Jimmy. When we look at any type of world building that we're doing, what we're really doing is looking at the 5 senses that people are going to experience in the world that you have going on, whether it's what you're seeing, what you're smelling, what you're touching. So whether you have a viewer that's watching a film or a reader that's looking through a book, you want to make it so it's relatable to the person that's doing that act. Because as human beings, we experience our own world in that same way. So if you want them to experience the world that you're either showing them or writing about, they have to be able to experience the world through that same video.
I agree, and to kind of finish off on my note on that, when we had the extras going down into the video store and getting their initial reactions, it was really awesome to see how they really bought that they were in a video store and back in the day, and I hope that'll translate to our audience as well when they see everything on camera. Because people are very critical, especially nowadays in the internet age, and somebody will definitely be quick to call you out on something, or if something is not accurate, or if it's really glaring. If you have like a 2000 made car in the 80s, you're going to get called out on that. So even down to vehicles and stuff when you're outside. Yeah.
See, I agree, but only partly. Yeah, the physical aspect, having the buildings, having the everything match, is gonna help you set the frame. But you also need to have the right attitudes in the people who are performing. Your characters running through the book, they have to match the same social, and this is what I was talking about earlier, the social aspect of what society was during that time. When I read Lovecraft, and you see a lot of racism in Lovecraft, and people get angry over that, and you go, well, that's the time that he was living in. It was unacceptable behavior when he was living in that time. So you got to add that to it. And when I see some movies that go back and they're older, and from new producers, not from the classics, and you see them shy away from the actual raw part of the society that was there, painting more of a like pristine, perfect thing that we want to remember. And that's where I disagree. We shouldn't make it as perfect as matching as we can. We should make it. What's that line from The Matrix? We have to make it flawed. There has to be something wrong with it, so that we can have this realism that, oh, this is not a perfect thing. This is actually what's being shown to me as actual life. And when I go through my world building for my books, right now what I'm doing with my movie script is I'm trying to make it as true to life for that piece. Means people are going to make mistakes. The technology, there's going to be mistakes everywhere. And that, I think, is what the proper world building is. It's not how perfect you can get it, but how many mistakes you can get into it that are actual mistakes from that era.
Yeah, well, and you bring up a good point. One thing I touched upon too briefly in the script was AIDS, because that was a big thing in the 80s, an outbreak, and there's kind of a nod to that, and that was a very bad thing that was going around. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah,
was picking out the flaws from that era too? Yeah, exactly, and it does add to the realism because it happened as a part of history. You can't shy away from that. Like some people want to. You can't, and it makes it all the more real when you incorporate that and reference that, especially when older audiences watch it. They'll pick up on oh yeah, the AIDS was big in the 80s, that spread and that panic. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know when I started out with my first book, I thought that I had to tie it into a time frame, and I referenced VCRs being out of date and implied things like Vampire Diaries being something that the grandmother had from her childhood. But as I went on, I stopped worrying about trying to tie it to this world because it was a whole other world that I was creating and was working. I worried more about the people and the characters and trying to set an environment where you could see what was going on, but I wasn't as worried about where are we in the country. I mean, accents. I just worried about writing about the characters that were believable. So maybe I don't do world building. I know my second book would create another world because of just that people were taken to another realm, but I don't know if world building always has to be done.
I know that I've seen that there's, and I talked about this a little bit actually on my last podcast that we did, that sometimes you have a story that's character driven, and so it primarily is focusing on the characters and the characters moving through the world, but you don't want to put so much focus on the world. And maybe it's because you don't know necessarily what the world was like then. Let's say that this is a discussion that we had. You have a character that's moving through ancient Babylon. Well, we weren't there. We know what was written. We know some of the roughs of it, but we don't know how true it is. You don't focus necessarily on all the aspects about how the buildings are made or what the people are wearing. You're focusing on the internal struggles and the internal conflicts that the characters have. A book, of course, gives you that leisure to be able to do that. In a film, I don't know, you necessarily have that freedom not to build the world up around your characters.
Yeah, and that leads me into my next question, which is, what details are truly essential for world building? What do we have to sell, and what do you think are some of the details that have been overplayed over time that people can kind of get away with and ignore?
Is there air? You get this in a lot of sci-fi movies as a little side pun, where people go to a new planet and you get this whole thing and they just walk onto it. You see this on really, really bad B movies. They walk around with stuff that wouldn't support life. This can also be seen when you look at fantasy stories. The is there air comment that I made is more of, is this something that can support these people? You know, you see, I just saw the new Warcraft movie, and I loved it. But at one point of the movie, I was like, is there air? It just popped into my head because can this support this kind of society? Can this support this? When we get into world building, and this is why I write urban fantasy, because it makes it a little bit easier for me because it's today. But when we go back to the other things, is the society that I'm building to live at this country or this populace, is it going to be able to be sustainable? And I think that's where people get lost is, well, I need to make it sustainable, so suddenly give them this huge technology advance for life, and then you've already destroyed your world that way. So that whole trying to force or shoehorn your society into a certain point is what's the problem.
Yeah, I think it has to be sustainable. I think that's what you're saying, is that the world itself has to be able to sustain itself. That I think that sometimes, let me reword that, you have to be able to focus on the issues that are pertinent to your storyline or to your plot line. There's
Yes.
some things that you're not going to necessarily bring up in the storyline, let's say maybe about how the politics work in the world, because maybe it's not pertinent to what's actually going on in the story. But the
Yes.
world itself has to be put together in a way that it's sustainable and it functions. And
Yes.
that's what you got to draw attention to.
Yeah.
And Jimmy, you have a good example of that with what you're doing with your Board is Hell series. You're in hell, and for some of that. How much of what details did you kind of shy away from? Was it the religious aspect of it, or were there certain details that you said, I gotta have this and I don't want to do this?
You know, we really haven't shied away from much yet. We touch upon topics that are current and relevant in today's society. I'll give you an example, like the Gay Pride Parade. That was one of the first things we shot with our Satan, and I guess as a concern, when we were going to take our Satan out to the Gay Pride Parade, is we didn't want to be there as a negative, you know, or try and be like, oh, we're gay hating or gay's evil, anything like that. We're quite the opposite. We're very supportive of that. So I wanted to get our Satan a rainbow boa, and in fact in Denver Westward they still use the image from last year that they took, which is awesome. But yeah, so we went out there with our Satan, and the gay community really embraced him, and I think the boa helped too, and they took it the right way, and so the thing with our Satan is it's funny. People who are religious can get upset and like, oh God, it's Satan and that topic, but when it comes down to it, we're actually poking fun at Satan because our Satan is very kind of flamboyant, and he's bisexual, and he talks all sophisticated, and you can see him like enjoying his cup of tea or something like that, which is really funny. So if you have a sense of humor, you'll really enjoy it. But we want to use this as an opportunity to not be preachy, but to take current events or things that have happened in the world and do a skit around it, and even like stuff from the Bible and exactly. And Kevin Ward, who writes a lot of the episodes, he has an eye for these current events and topics that are really hilarious, and people can watch an episode and hopefully laugh at, instead of all the seriousness around it.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Religion's
So, I'm sorry,
a topic with books. I know
Come again? Oh.
religion's a very hard topic with books. I know my book is based around goddesses and gods, and I find myself struggling with not wanting to be offensive, like to anyone's beliefs, and want people to think I'm maybe mocking it all or not honoring it. So I do struggle with that, but I don't know. I just decided we just have to write, and people are going to love it and people are going to hate it. So, unfortunately, I don't know how you can please everybody.
And I think a lot of it has to do with what it is that you're trying to teach with it. What's the message that you're trying to send through the material? And that kind of lets you know where your boundaries are and how offensive you're going to be, or what exactly it is that you're sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry,
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I agree 100%. It's the same with films. You know, our first feature film, Hans Crippleton Talk to the Huns, you know, was very similar. It was very politically incorrect humor, but it was really funny, and it was really over the top, and the makeups were over the top, and it was hillbillies and zombies, and so it was really zany, and it never took itself serious. But Bored as Hell, I feel, is going to be a little more appealing to the masses, just because it's going to take on more serious subjects and things like that. And some people are going to still get offended by it, that we went there and poked fun, but you know, it's a good point. Some people are going to hate it. Some people are going to laugh, and you just got to make yourself vulnerable like that, and you know who your audience is and who you're reaching out to. I mean, we've even reached out to some people who we thought that are in our target audience, and you know, got offended, which was kind of surprising. Not often, but you know. So yeah, it just comes with it. Some people are going to get it and love it, and some people are not. But the worst thing to do is to censor yourself and your art and your craft.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I agree. And the thing though is, when you're writing or when you're producing, when you're doing something, if you're gonna do it in spite, with spite and that's your reason for doing it, it's gonna come off that way, and it's gonna come off wrong. But if you're actually just doing it because you're writing for your art, you know, it's not gonna come off as something mean, except by the really ultra sensitive people who get triggered by, you know, water rolling down the river.
Right.
You know, so when you write your art, like there's some stuff in my romance book that people might find offensive. There's stuff in my urban fantasy that people might find offensive. But you know, when I wrote love, when I wrote my books, when I write my screenplay, I'm not writing it to hurt people's feelings. You know, I'm writing it to basically tell a story, and the people that are going to get offended by it are going to get offended, and I don't care. The people that are going to see the story for what it is and actually understand it, that's my target audience, and I'm writing it for them.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah, I was thinking of Darren Aronofsky, is that his name is, that made the Noah movie with Russell Crowe. Man, he got a lot of flack for that, and I'm sure there's some mixed opinions even here on what exactly that was. But it was creative. He did something. He definitely went away from the biblical sense of what the story was, and he actually probably raised more awareness of the real story just by making the film so counterproductive to what was written in the Bible. And I found that pretty phenomenal. But that's one of those things I think very much ties into, you know, when you're creating your world and you're trying to make things, how many mistakes are you actually going to put in there, and what is your audience, and who are you trying to essentially pull into it to deliver a certain type of message.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and a lot of times it can be used to shed light on an unknown topic or area. You know, when you do it in a more serious light. A good example that comes to mind is the newest Rambo with Sylvester Stallone. He went to Burma and actually filmed there, but he shed light on a very serious subject of the way the Burma villagers and stuff were being treated and tortured, and the little kids and the women being raped. It was brutal, and so many people are not aware of that, what's going on, you know, in the rest of the country. But you know, that's what's so admirable about Stallone, is to put that into an action film in the franchise, and each one has something political to it, but it sheds light on a real life subject, and he doesn't shy away. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie, it's really brutal.
And I agree. And when you look at the ultra sensitive people that get triggered easily, some of them, you know, they didn't see that aspect of it. They didn't see the way the villagers were being treated. All they saw was, oh, a Christian girl is kidnapped, and this is more hatred for Christians. See, we're right.
Exactly.
And you know, and that wasn't the main part of the story. That was a good tool to move the story along, but the main part, you know, even you can see it the way they were kidnapping the kids and the way that guy was raping everybody that moved. You know, you can see that it wasn't about the Christian saving the Christian girl. It was about this whole political movement that needed to be made.
Exactly, and throwing somebody in there like Rambo himself, who's like the realist in the situation, when he's talking to the missionary and the Christian girl, you know, about, you know, why are you gonna do this? You're not gonna change anything.
Yeah.
But as you know, it's about standing up for something, and the people in the villages, and eventually Rambo went along and went from there. So yeah, exactly. There's a lot more to the subject if people watch for it. and how you can't be like moved by that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. We're hijacking your podcast, Joe. You're on mute still.
No, it's fine. It's fine. This is great conversation. I'm very happy to engage in this. So, what is our process in creating our world? How do we begin? How deeply do you get into it from the start? Are you guys detailing very carefully things and little nuances, or are you just writing the character story and writing around that?
I can start with mine. The world that I write in has been around. I've been putting it together for almost 17 years now, so it's massive. I started off, and of course, I write fantasy, so it's all made up. I don't work with the contemporary stuff or modern day stuff, so it's my own world, my own land. But I have maps drawn up. I have cities. I have religions, politics, people, probably over a couple thousand NPCs that are throughout my world that I can pull in at any time within the story. It's very deep and detailed, but only a fraction of that, and a very small fraction of that ever actually makes it into the book.
Did you start that way, Josh?
Yeah, I started right. I had my first book done when I was 17. I started building the world around the age of 15, and I've been writing in the same world ever since then. And I mean, it's huge. I have gigabytes on my computer full of all the stuff that goes within that world. But again, it's what's actually relevant to the story, and that's what I pull out to put into the book. But anything is there if I needed to call on it, whether it's who's the king of the city, what's the religion, what's the political system, who's the factions, what are the guilds there, who are the leaders of those guilds. It's very, very detailed.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
No, okay. Go ahead, Jimmy.
I start with trying to kill my character. It sounds counterproductive, I know, but with my romance and with my fantasy is actually re-released, the one that just got released this past week. And the reason why I try to kill my character is I try to put them in the worst possible situation to start with, and basically torture them with as much of their own lifestyle as I can, and this way the world is actually being built as they walk. It's that whole almost like a holodeck kind of thing where this is what he's experiencing now, or this is what she's experiencing now, so this is what's around her, this is what's around him. And as they move through room to room, the layers get built up and up and up and up, and that's where my characters come to life. And yeah, I've had stories where the character died completely, so I had to throw it away because there's no more characters in it. I just have this empty world. But in my urban fantasy that just got released, and the second part's going to be released in August, I think, or July. You start off in his apartment, and he lives in a cesspool. What Joe has now, reverse it and put everything that you possibly can into one room, and then just let stuff rot. That's where he's living in, and to watch his transformation out of that as he goes into the real world and as he grows. As his world gets cleaner, my world gets built. The same thing with the romance. He starts off in this car that's it's a POS car. It's a gremlin that's dying. The windows don't work and it's overheating, and he's boiling in the California sun. You have that, and they're suffering through this whole thing of the world that they're in, and that's building the layer upon layer upon layer. And that's how I started with my stories, and that's how I start with all my stories. Sorry, go ahead, Jimmy.
Oh yeah, no, I agree, and very similar with filmmaking and screenwriting. There's beats and stuff that you can hit within a script, and what your character wants, where you see your character at when you start, compared to where they're at the end of the film. And it can be something as like rags to riches. Somebody who's starting out down on their luck, and we see them in the slums, or like in an apartment or something like that, and they got the heart and everything, but they just haven't got any breaks in life. And then as the story progresses, you see them get an opportunity to get everything they want, and they take that opportunity. And they grow, and of course Rocky's a great example of this. And by the end, either your character is going to be famous and is going to have the title, or in the case of Rocky, you know, it was just about proving you have what it takes, you know, that you're not just a nobody in life. And as in Rocky, he lost to Apollo Creed in the first film, but you know, and again, not just about boxing. It's about, you know, being an underdog, and I feel that's really important to, you know, to world building, because that's a really realistic part of life and everyday life and us living in the world. There's so many of us who are underdogs and want a shot at the big time, or at our profession, you know, or if you're, you know, whatever it may be that you want to be in life. And sometimes, you know, you want it so bad that it changes you as a person, and sometimes not for the better. And, you know, for example, if you want to be famous so much, you know, that you start, you know, you're kind of ugly to those around you, or to family, or you know, to get to where you want. And then that's kind of the lesson at the end of the film, is like, wow, was all this worth pushing family and friends away, you know? So, and again, either you come out on top and you have that lesson learned that, okay, I can be where I want to be, and still, you know, not lose who I am at my core when I started out, and not forgetting where you come from, you know, or you can, you know, just fall completely. And so, yeah, I really dig that with the screenwriting process, and with the characters, and taking them on that journey, and the lessons they're learning, and the way they interact with other characters, you know, within the world, or within the script world.
Have you written something that you didn't have a scene to, Jimmy, a background and just the theme, and then built the background around that?
You know, with my first film that I did, my very first film, was called Betrayed Heart. I knew what the theme was going to be, because it was based off a personal situation that I went through, and then, but I knew I had to add in, you know, some background, as you say, to the story, because it couldn't all be factual, and not tell a story, and have a spine to it too. So yeah, that definitely comes to mind. That first short film that I did.
I know when I wrote my first book, I had the luxury of just writing, and as I wrote, sometimes things would come up and I could go back. But since I have a series now, I find that I have to keep going back and saying, well, how old were they here? Did I say this happened? I feel like it gets more complicated when you do a series, trying to keep authentic to the first book that people really love, and also trying not to upset people. My first book, people that read it, I knew you read it when you sent me the text message, or you sent me the message. I knew you read the book, because you're like, how could you? I get that all the time. So I know they read my book. If you don't say that to me, I know you didn't read it. I'm like, you read it, I'm sure. But no, I feel like it's hard to keep the world sometimes, like, consistent. As far as the second book, I did outline it. The first, I just wrote. Kind of miss the writing, not worrying. The best part.
Yeah, I've heard that's been a common issue among writers that I've spoken with, where they have issues knowing exactly what the world looked like, or how things worked in the world, especially going through a series, and they always have to go back through and start reading through all their old material in order to figure it out. I know that can be a really complicated thing, which is why it's nice to write in contemporary, because the world doesn't really change too often. For myself, like I said, I've had my world built so long, I kind of have a blueprint, I have a map, and so I always know what the world looks like. It's not very confusing. I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, and they played a lot in that world, so it's been well explored.
I think for me, it's always about the characters when it comes to where my world's going to be, especially in a series book, where I'm going to take them. And the hardest part that I find, as I'm finishing my third in my series for the fantasy that's going to be released later on this year, what I'm sitting there going is, okay, what does this guy do, or what's his job, or where is he in the current state of affairs? And that's where I have to go back and read and reread. The world building itself, you know, because it's fantasy, it allows that slight freedom for the world to change. It allows that leeway where you can say, well, no, now their car is gonna fly because why not? If you take Harry Potter, why can't a car fly? And you have that done there. So allowing for these adjustments in a fantasy allows you and gives you that freedom you need where you don't have to be consistent to your world. And I find when somebody gets upset about that consistency, I find that they aren't my target audience, and for the reason being is because they want something that's and I lost a friend by saying this, but they want a cookie cutter style story where they've read Harry Potter, they've read Anne Rice. That's what vampires do. That's what magicians do. That's it. And when you deviate from that, you're gonna make them unhappy. And when you deviate too much from that, that's where people really get unhappy, and that's where they're justified. But a slight deviation, a slight change is all right. Not to promote it, but if you look at Twilight, they deviated so much from the canon of vampires that's why people, I think, were completely upset with it. That big sidestep. It's almost like a fu to the masses. If they had deviated just a little bit, I think it would have been a better story.
So I'm interested. I'm sorry, Joe.
Go
I had a
ahead,
question.
go ahead.
I had a question for Jimmy about if there's anything in his film where he looks at how maybe folks in the 80s are shaped differently based on the world around them and kind of the things they were experiencing during that time opposed to now. Is that something you can pull out in that film?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I wanted to capture as much as I could within a short film segment within a feature film, and with the 80s, was the fun and laid back and everybody having a good time. Like when I think of the 80s, I was born in the mid 80s, so I remember the tail end of it. But I love that period. It's my favorite decade. So I've watched a lot of 80s movies and things like that to see what a fun happening time it was, and that was really expressed through the clothing, through the parties, through even the video stores for that matter. So that's where I'm incorporating it is through Radical Video. And in fact, the scenes we shot last weekend, that was one of the things was for all the extras. That was my note, is to everybody be having fun and excited, and to be at the video store. But I think it's very reflective of that decade too, and how much fun it was. So yeah, that's how I'm incorporating it with that particular segment with the 80s one.
And on some of your sets, Jimmy, and your production blogs, I notice the detailing that goes into what you're creating, and the aspect of it. A big popular thing these days. We were talking about audiences pointing out mistakes and things like that. But a big popular thing in the filmmaking world, and film especially these days, is Easter egging, and having filmmakers and producers putting certain little aspects of something that would relate to an audience that is really into what you're doing. Did you do any of that within any of your parts of your terror tales? Like, especially with the 80s things, did you have certain little symbols that people who lived through that time frame would remember and see? And was that on purpose?
Absolutely, man. One of the things was one of the extras. It's in fact just one of my personal suits because I love Miami Vice. So I think back in the 80s, people watched Miami Vice and guys, of course, and everybody was rocking the white suit and the pastel color shoes or shirts and the shoes with no socks. And what's interesting about that is in the 2000s when I finally started watching Miami Vice, it affected me kind of similar back then because I'm like, that is a cool look. Nobody wears it anymore because it's the modern time. But I love the white suit and that look. So I put an extra in my white suit and pastel shirt, and so there's that kind of Miami Vice nod in the Radical Video store. But again, it's also a nod to that time because some people were actually dressing like that. And I think another thing that was important to me was not to be very tongue-in-cheek with it or very parody. You know, I love The Wedding Singer. It's hilarious, and I'm not even knocking it in any way, shape, or form. But they went very kind of stereotypical, over the top '80s with all the looks, and even the douchebag guy in there that she's gonna marry, he's got like the Miami Vice look. You know, just everything was very um, over exaggerated a little bit. So with the Radical Video segment, and and paying close attention to the details and watching 80s movies like 16 Candles and Say Anything, you see that the style was there, and you had multiple layers of clothing and accessories, but it was still very kind of muted too. You know, it wasn't all bright hot pinks and neon colors and things like that. It was there was other fashion to it, and the other side of that coin is, I want a grittiness too, kind of a, obviously we're not filming in New York City, but I think a lot of kind of like a gritty 80s New York, and especially since it's a slasher throwback kind of segment too. But there are a lot of nods in there that people are going to pick up. We got actual VCRs. Another thing, that we're paying attention to that people will pick up on and remember, and it's funny. I posted a picture of a sign that's in the Radical Video store, and it said membership $99.95. So I was watching the documentary, and they're saying video stores would charge like $100 and up for video rental memberships. So I'm like, all right, I'll go with that. So I put it at $100. I post the picture, and somebody had commented and was saying, they were $59.95 from what I remember. So I'm like, oh, that's cool. So I changed the sign up, and now it's $59.95. That sounds about right. But it's people will see that, and they'll be like, yeah, I remember paying for a membership. And then of course, as time went on, they became free, and memberships got cheaper until they were free. And there's even a Radical Video membership card that's seen in the film, VCR player rentals where you could rent VCRs, and of course there's going to be the adult section. We got a neon adult sign in the video store and the black curtain. It's a lot of things like that, and that attention to detail that are not necessarily Easter eggs, but that people will recognize and remember.
Is there a line in the dialogue, or at some point, please rewind, be kind, please rewind somewhere in there?
Oh yeah, it's going to be in the inserts. There's going to be some inserts where you see on the VHS tapes. I have hundreds of them now, and some are from actual rental stores from back in the day. And you see the please be kind rewind. There's one with the you get a $2 fee if you didn't rewind the tape and bring it back. So there's going to be inserts of that, and we got a whole bunch of posters from the 80s that were sent to video rental stores, and so there's going to be inserts of that on some of the posters where it'll show the retail price to buy some of the films, like $40 or $80 or $90 for some of the VHSs and things like that are going to be spliced in inserts, and it's all going to be part of the opening of this segment to create the vibe and energy of that era. And in the video stores of that time, so yeah, so stuff like the Miami Vice would probably be like more of the wink and nod, and there'll be little bits like that.
Awesome, and I'm sure people will point out other stuff to you as they see it and go along.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, people aren't shy about that kind of thing.
No, they're not. That's what I'm trying to be as factual as possible.
Yeah. Just a good time to remind everybody who's watching, who's a viewer of what we're doing here. If you look at your panel on your display, you see like these little yellow tags. That's the showcase tags. If you click on that, it'll have everybody's link, and you can click right to their YouTube page. Jimmy does a great production blog. Jen has a great YouTube channel that he just started. Josh, I got it right too. His podcast, his Writer Edge podcast, and even Marnie's channel's there. She's got some great readings of her book on there, and everybody's YouTube channel and everybody's Google Plus profile is there. Friend these guys, subscribe to these guys' stuff because it's fantastic, all of it. I have very little time in the day, but when I do, I'm watching their stuff. So everybody needs to get into that. And you can do that very easily just click on the little yellow tags there. Look like little price tags. So, and then that'll show everybody's stuff, and you can click right on there. And if not, wait till after this is posted. I will post everything onto my website as well. So everybody's links will be there. We were touched on it a little bit. Marty touched on it actually a little bit about continuity in books, and even, I mean, with film and television, it's huge. But in printed work too, especially in a series, there's got to be a continuity. So how do we approach that aspect of our world building? Are we taking notes? Are we noting things as they go along? Are we going back and rereading? How do we approach continuity?
I take notes.
Yeah.
I would love to have a poster board with like a whole like timeline. And I started to do that, and it just became so overwhelming. I'm like, who can I pay to just make my timeline for me? If I need to have someone read my book and do it. Anyone out there wants to do that?
So you're saying you have people read your stuff to help you like pick out the continuity?
No,
it was kind of breaking up a little bit. Sorry.
I just wish I would have made a timeline from the beginning. Because there's so many. I just wish I would have mapped it all out a little better. And I did go back, but I feel like maybe I could have done it first. It's kind of like showing that in your book the first time. Like if I would have known, then what I know now, life would have been easier. So I have been trying to write down notes, at least having a reference point, but I don't have a good way to do it. I'd love to hear if you guys are. I mean, it sounds like Josh has his whole world. I'd love to know how he has it all mapped out, unless it's in his head. You can't really share that.
I paid a really pretty price for somebody to make my map. It was hand drawn for a number of years, and then I paid a guy out of Europe named Joseph Vandal to completely make it for me with everything on there, so I have that as a nice reference point. But in the course of writing, I take notes. When I have certain names, or if I'm pointing out certain colors, or if there's certain themes that I have, like maybe a country or a kingdom or an individual that holds, I take notes and I keep those throughout the document for me to kind of have a quick reference back to while I'm writing, to make sure that I reiterate that. I'm sure you have the same thing in film telling, but in book writing they always tell you, tell the reader the story, tell them again, and then tell them one more time. And I do that when I'm writing, so I want to make sure that I'm reiterating the things that I want to stick in the reader's head when they get done with the story.
I mean, do you have a script supervisor, Jimmy, when you do your film stuff that points out continuity?
I try to. Yeah, a lot of times, we pull somebody, who's just kind of standing around and like, oh hey, do you mind, keeping us on track with this? Or, and some sets will actually have somebody dedicated to script supervising in that sense on set. When I'm writing, I try to be as meticulous as possible and research as much as I can. Obviously you can kind of research, and then you just finally got to start writing and have that. Otherwise, you're just going to keep researching every little detail and driving yourself nuts. So I try to research everything, be as factual as possible, and then go back and read through it. And then there'll be a lot of times where I'll catch something. I'm like, oh man, this is happening here, but it doesn't match up with what was written earlier. And that's the beautiful thing of rewrites, is you really catch things like that. And as you write it, you can iron out so many things, and until you make it as solid as you can, and then you just gotta go with it. Otherwise, you're going to be rewriting, and there's always going to be something. And then passing it off to trusted sources is huge, because when you have somebody else read it, they'll point out things to you that they really put into perspective and get you thinking. And you're right one way, but then they point out something and it's like, oh, that does make a lot of sense. And it's really great to have trusted sources like that. And then again, in another rewrite, you can make those adjustments. Yeah.
So we have a question from our audience. From Mr. Jeff Nicholson. I don't know if you know Jeff, Jimmy, or not. He's a Denver filmmaker, and cool. He said he's written screenplays, and I'm working on my first novel. So what's your preference? Do you begin with an outline, or do you start with an idea and see where it takes you? Do you begin with the end in mind, or do plot points reveal themselves as you write?
No, that's an awesome question. It's kind of a combination, to be honest. I like the idea will come to me for a story, whether it starts with a character or an actual story, and then I'll start from there. I'll usually start with the beginning of the film, how it'll start and how it'll end, and especially when you know how it's going to end, you know what you're working towards as you're writing, which is great. And I love to outline as well. And this is where it'll either go one way or the other. I'll either start fleshing out all the characters more and then outline because I'll know what the characters are, or I'll outline to help me get the story going and the environment that the characters are going to be in, and start putting the characters in as I go, and that helps me flesh out the story in the outline, and then I can go back and flesh out the characters more and give them character traits and flaws and things like that. So for me, it kind of weaves in and out until I get to page one of writing the script. But I do find it beneficial to outline because you'll have an idea of where your story's going. And this isn't even a paid plug or anything like that, but Save the Cat. I love this book by Blake Snyder. It's got a lot of great stuff on the beats you want to hit within a script, and where you should take your character and things like that. But for me, yeah, I love starting with outlining, because when you get to, if you just, and it depends. Some people can sit down, write a script, and boom, the story comes out in the script, and I've done that sometimes. But a lot of times I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, what's going to happen next? Where's this going? And things get muddled, and you spend a lot of time when you're writing the script when you're just doing it on a whim. Whereas if you have some kind of general idea in the outline, you can translate into your actual screenwriting much easier and smoother. And there's no law saying you have to stick 100% to your outline. And I think that's where some people get controversial about that method, is they feel that people stick to the outline, or you have to stick to the outline, and you don't. It just guides you. And for me, when I'm writing and I have an outline, then I can really have the freedom and expression to add new things, or the story's going this way, or I think of something as I'm writing, I'm like, oh yeah, let me take the plot point this way or that way. But that exactly.
I agree with that, Jeff, and I think that writing for me is the same type of process. I'm a firm believer in plotting out a story. I like to know what the theme of my story is. Let's say that I want to primarily teach the reader about friendship, or what my concept of friendship is, and so that wants to be my end goal, is where the character has a firm idea of what it means to have a good friendship in his life. Or maybe that's bravery, or maybe it's courage, or whatever you want your theme to be in the story. And so at the beginning of the story, then I want my character to be the opposite of what I want him to learn by the end of it. And then throughout it, I have these plot points that help teach him this lesson throughout the course of the story. And so it's working the character through this outline in order to get him from point A to point B, where he's having all these different experiences throughout the novel that helps him get to the final destination, so to speak. But yeah, I'm a firm believer in plotting and outlining, but I agree, you have to be able to be willing to change it if you see that something better comes along. Sometimes you get that just by writing the story out and start fleshing it out. Sometimes you have a beta reader that says, hey, you know what, here's a great rewrite, and here's something new that you could add in that you never thought of to begin with.
Absolutely. And to add to that real quick too, a little bit more, from the screenwriting aspect, and jumping ahead a smidge, when you get into casting, when you get actors' inputs, you cast them for a role in your script, and you get their input on the character, you're also really enlightened. And that happened to me recently in Terror Tales with an actress, Lorraine Landon, and her character, the way I've written her, was more one-dimensional. And Lorraine talked to me about the character and really amped up the psychological aspect of the character, which was amazing. And all of her tips on her character was really good, and I'm incorporating that into the rewrite, because it's great, and it adds a whole new layer to the character that wasn't quite there before. So absolutely, not restricting yourself, and you don't feel like you have to restrict yourself.
See,
Do our novelists experience the same thing when they get beta readers?
No, with beta readers, I have a two or three that do beta reading, but it's a long process. And I do take their advice, and I do sit down with one of them. I sit down and go through the books page by page, and it's my job to convince him as why the character is doing this now. Why, what's the purpose behind it? And if I can't, I have to change it. And the questions that pop up, I change it. When I wrote Kaoru in Love's Shadow, we went through page by page, and I have the document at my work, and it's sitting there. You can see all the red marks, and when he asks a question, oh, you're right, this is right, I have to change it here. But as far as an outline, I refuse to ever write an outline, and the reason why is because I'll spend more time writing an outline and never write the book. Um, so I refuse. I utterly refuse to ever put something on paper, sketch anything out. Um, the second reason why I never want to write an outline ever again, and I have done it before when I was younger. The second reason why I refuse and I don't want to is because as I'm writing my stories, I'm living my characters' lives, and they're doing what I feel they would do in that situation. When I'm writing the movie script that I'm writing right now, and Joe has read 25 pages or 30 pages of it, somewhere around there, um, you know, there's no outline where these characters are going. There's a mission they have to do. Whether the mission is going to be successful or not, I don't know. I have no idea. Should I know as the person writing the script? Some people say, yeah, you should know, but why? Why should I know if it's going to be successful or not? All I know is where they have to go and what they have to do by a certain time, or B happens. That's it. Um, but as these characters are going there and they're interacting, if I have an outline, and even if I don't have to follow my outline, they're not going to be real, in my point of view. If they're already fleshed out completely, what's left for me to do to bring them to life? When I write the book, when I write out their dialogue, and later on when I do the proofreading and when I do the editing and when I do the little changes here and there, but the very first go up until the end, and I got notes from Joe on the script, but I'm refusing to go through and edit the script I'm working on now. I've taken the notes into account and I've gone through it, but I'm refusing to go back and edit because I'm going to be stuck on editing mode rather than finishing the script. Which I'm on page. I got slowed down, but I'm on page 60 right now. I have 30 more pages to go per Joe's request that I have to go to page 90 plus another 20 after that to have extra stuff. So, but it should be done by mid-July or so. That being said, if I'm fleshing it out, they're not going to be alive. But if I'm writing a situation, for example, there's open gunfire, and these are trained soldiers. And I sit there and I go, well, they duck behind a brick wall. Okay, so they're behind a brick wall. They're taking fire. What are they going to do? Well, easy. One person switches off to the right and starts popping off shots from there. The other one goes to the hero. What's the best tactical way that they would react to that situation? If I have an outline, yeah, it might be easier to write, but for me, it won't feel so real. I have a scene where one of the enemy, and it's a sci-fi, where one of the enemy, it's a bug kind of little creature thing, and it's making a run for it. And when I wanted to kill it, and the reason why I wanted to kill it was because it's a plot device to move the script along to Act 3, to the end of Act 2 and going on to Act 3. And this scene where this bug is running, you have the sergeant, his name is Stone. He goes, Joker, take out the bug. And Joker, who has his heavy machine gun, he's laying waste to these huge brutes, drops it and in fluid motion drops it, unslings his sniper rifle, and gets a bead on the bug and pops off 4 shots because it's semi-automatic, and he doesn't have to take off his eyes from the target. So he sit there, ta-ta-ta-ta. And in the same motion as the bullets are going off to hit the bug, he's reslung the sniper rifle back on the sting, and he's going back to laying waste to the ones attacking them from the front. But that whole scene feels more real if I take into account that I haven't plotted it out, because I have to physically do the action. Is this physically possible to be able to do it? And when you're plotting, you don't get that whole, is this physically possible? You're getting that whole, this is what I wanted to do, and I'm going to make it work. You understand?
Geez,
Well,
Jim, spoiler alert, I'm reading the damn script.
but it's interesting, and I think um,
Sorry, Joe.
what's great hearing that, Jin, is there's really no right or wrong answer
Yeah,
to
yeah.
it. I feel you could definitely go either way, and both are very valid. And I think a lot of times when you do break the rules and you stray, like a lot of filmmakers do, you create some really original stuff, and sometimes that's what you have to do to make something original is break the rules like that. For example, if you are following an outline, and even Save the Cat, for example, and following these beats, you tend to get stuff that's been seen a lot before because it's the standard way of writing and the beats that you hit. But what's cool with that, as a writer, is you can still throw twists in there and do something creative and try and do something fresh. But on the other side of that coin, I do feel when you break away from that, if you don't necessarily follow a traditional three act structure. Quentin Tarantino is a prime example of this with his films and stuff like Reservoir Dogs. It's really cool because you can start producing original stuff that way. If you just start writing or let the character start talking to you and writing it as you go. Would you kind of agree, Jin? Is that kind of how it goes for you when you're writing? Do you find a lot of originality coming from that as well? When you
Yes.
don't restrain yourself to a traditional structure?
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing. Even when it comes down to the world, right, and where I got the idea for this movie, if I put myself into outlining the way the world's gonna work, then I get the even if it's not a lot, you get a small restraint, you get a small let's say you get fenced in. You get fenced in to a certain point, and yes, you're flexible. You can still change, and you don't have to follow the script. But you've already decided this is as far as I'm going to take it. And even though you don't want to, it's much easier to change if you don't have that fence up. You know what I mean? Um, and when you're building a character to run around in this world that you created, if you've got your outline, you got everything penciled out, you've already put limits onto what they're going to be able to do or what they're going to be able to react with. So yeah, I agree completely.
Absolutely. And the last thing I'll say on that note, I think it's kind of a decision you need to think about too, as a writer or as a screenwriter for that matter. I think it's very similar. And what I'm about to mention is, you know, if you're writing for yourself and telling the story and getting it out there and hoping people will like it, or if you're writing like to try and make money in the sense where people you see Hollywood, for example, you see a lot of the same stuff over and over because people are comfortable with that. Audiences like seeing that. They're comfortable with that. And then when you get like an art house film or something that's breaking the mold, it does get its audience, but it's usually a little more segregated, or it becomes a cult classic or something along those lines. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with it either, because you can write a script and you can write it for the market, and chances are you'll probably end up making money that way. I know with filmmaking, it's something I'm faced with. I'm told like supernatural films and possession films and things like that are sell really really well, and like get into the retail stores and things like that. But I'm kind of always torn with that. It's like, okay, do I want to write something that'll probably end up making a little bit of money, but not really what I want to write, or do I want to write what I want to write and put it out there as an artist and tell the stories I want to tell, and hopefully people pick up on it, or if I do a supernatural thing or possession thing, give it my spin. Yeah, so I think it's just a question a lot of artists got to ask. If you want to write the stories you want to write and get them out there, whether they follow a structure or they break the mold, or if you want to write for bankability.
Well, that's the first thing. That's the first thing that. Sorry for cutting you off, Marnie. But that's the first thing that Joe asked me was, "Am I writing this to make money, or if I'm just writing this to write it?" And I told him I'm writing this to make money if I can. So that's why I'm doing it. Sorry,
Nice.
go ahead, Marnie.
Well, I was just going to say, as far as the plot, I feel like the series I mentioned, I need to have a plot, but I don't feel like it's a, oh, I have to stick with it. I feel like these are points I'm going to. One line just, even sometimes I have a word on a line saying go there, and sometimes I won't go there, but it's a what if, and it keeps me more on track. And especially with the series, because I already know what I want to do in book 6, so I kind of have to at least follow some sort of a pattern, or otherwise I'll just have gibberish and really no stories that are cohesive. But your plot shouldn't lock you in. It's just a guide. And he's back. Say hi.
What's the one rule everybody follows, no matter
Man.
what?
Move forward.
Josh, come on, Josh.
What was the last part of that question, Joe? I heard with the rule that we do what?
What's the one rule that you will always follow no matter what in your world building?
Okay. I thought you meant like what one rule everybody follows.
I was gonna say I'm not a conformist. I don't follow rules well.
I guess if I had to pick one rule, it would be the story is to really focus on the story and the characters and the emotional impact. I mean that's kind of my mantra: story, characters, and emotional impact. Nothing worse than writing something or putting something out there and the audience doesn't feel anything. But when you can write something and put it out there, and if it's a horror film, they're jumping and they're getting scared, or they're like, oh my god, or you do something shocking, just whatever, or you're making them feel sad. Yeah, that's the rule I follow is those three things, and it translates to any story, horror, comedy, whatever.
Yeah, I think that mine's probably similar to Jimmy's. My one rule that I'll always follow is that I only include things from the world that change the character. So whatever it is that I'm including in the story that has to do with the world and what's going on has to have some sort of emotional impact on the character and change the character, or I don't include it.
Nice.
And I think for me, that's also as a reader, that's the thing that draws me away from reading. When I read books that go on for pages upon pages describing something that has nothing to do with the character, it's really frustrating. Because the whole time as a reader, I'm reading going, how's this going to come along later? What's this going to mean for the character? Why am I seeing this right now? It's like somebody showing me, it's like if you were to watch American Beauty, where they got the entire thing of the trash can blowing in the wind and it had nothing to do with the story, and they just kept filming it back blowing in the wind. It would have been extremely frustrating.
Yeah.
You have to have whatever it is that you're showing the reader have something to do with the story.
Yeah. For me, the rule that must be followed, and this is something that I stick with completely, is your characters have to have emotional growth. Of one point, if your characters have no emotional growth, then they're not going to feel real in the world. And how they interact with the world is what's going to give them their emotional growth. So they must have it, in my opinion.
I agree, and especially as an audience or a reader, you're there with this character, and you're going to relate with them, or if you can't relate personally, you're going to see that wow, they've changed. For example, Carlito's Way. The film kind of starts out where he's getting out of prison, Al Pacino, and it's awesome. You try so hard to go on the straight and narrow, but you're on this journey with him, and you see him get slipped back into the crime world. And I love stuff like that with the characters' growth, and I don't want to spoil the rest of that film, but sometimes it works out and the character gets what they want, and sometimes they don't. Yeah.
Sorry.
Cool, but I feel like everything is character driven. My main character, everything will always center around how it affects her, and as long as it's keeping her storyline, intriguing and active, and as long as I can keep moving with it, I'll keep writing it. But I don't like anything that cuts off that storyline. That's my only rule.
So in marketing our stories, does anybody use their world they created as a tool to market, and how do you do that?
Absolutely, yeah. I'll say I keep going back to the '80s segment that we're shooting right now. But what's fun with that is a marketing tool. For example, is the membership card, the Radical Video membership card. I posted a picture of it online, and people see that, and again, it's going to strike a chord because they're like, oh yeah, I remember those days. When the video stores were big, and having the membership card, and it makes it really fun for a marketing aspect when you can incorporate elements of your story like that. And that's just one example of what I've been doing and what I'm doing with mine.
I really like.
Those damn video stores use the cheapest laminate. Mine always peeled away.
Right, exactly.
Oh,
Sometimes, yeah, you get a laminated one and it would just fade or get torn up in the wallet.
Oh yeah. Actually, when I moved to Japan, they still had video stores, and there's still one or two hanging on video stores that are still, they're thriving because they have they're really, people here tend to really be loyal to a store, so they're hanging on. Some of them are, but most of the time, you're renting DVDs, or watching. The Netflix hasn't really taken off as much here yet, but it's coming. It's coming. What for me, what I was gonna say is, yeah, I agree with that whole idea. That one part of your world, using it as a teaser or using it as a way to get people in. When I tweet, and I haven't tweeted in a while. My Twitter's been down because I've tweeted like 3 or 4 times this past week because I've been really, really busy, and I haven't had even time to set up my tweets. But when I tweet about my romances, I tweet about it. They're based out of Los Angeles. They're based out of Los Angeles, Oxnard, and Santa Barbara. That's the extent of their world. And when I tweet about my fantasy, it's a world encompassing fantasy, but it starts off in Japan, and when I release book 2 is gonna be actually starting off in Alaska. It's gonna be going through Alaska, and when I get to book 3, all the way down to Mexico and South America, so it's gonna be a full world thing. So when I use it, I'd like to use the whole The Strain. I don't know if you guys have read the books, but when the TV show came out for The Strain, they used a lot of that world, the subways, the rats, invading the whole thing as a promotional thing, and that's what I'm trying to do.
That's awesome. Nice.
Yeah, I have to say that I'm pretty excited about your 80s thing, Jimmy. That's a great marketing technique. And it honestly sounds like you and I had a similar childhood and probably about a similar age. So you say 80s film stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I want to see that. I'm totally stoked about it. Yeah, I know everything you're talking about. I was like, yeah, I'm like having over here having like flashbacks. And
actually, it's making me feel old, and I'm starting to feel like.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I remember it myself, and love growing up on video stores, and that's where of course, a lot of my film knowledge came from, and horror films and things like that. Was seeing the covers and how cool they were, and like, I want to see this movie, whether it was bad or good. And one thing that always stood out to me that I put in the film, was like there's just the smell and like the popcorn and the popcorn machines, and we got like a tabletop kettle popcorn machine in our video store because I remember so many of those video stores having those, and they make the popcorn, you get them right there to go with your movie, and that was one of my earliest memories of a video store was the smell of the popcorn being made. So I'm like, our video store's got to have a popcorn machine in there.
Yeah, it's totally reminiscing and nostalgia. I mean, you got mostly millennials in the world right now, so you hear 80s and everybody just goes nuts about it.
Absolutely, man.
But for me, yeah, I use World, of course, to sell mine too. Melkorka, my bestseller, one of the things that I think that really drew people into that is that it's written during what's equivalent to the Copper Age going on to the Bronze Age. And so weapons are really unheard of. They have a few copper daggers here and there, but a copper dagger you can only hit somebody with about twice, and then it bends and it's useless at that point. Copper swords don't really exist, and so there's a very rough feel to the world. There's no giant castles, there's no medieval European type of thing that's going on. There's people essentially living in log, homes or one-room gurs or what have you, trying to survive, the rough wilderness in the world they live in. And I think that's a world that drew people immediately in. It took you away from that fantasy feel that most people get and puts you into a much more rugged world.
Absolutely.
Is there anything that surprised you when you immerse yourself in your world, when you're creating it? Has something come out and just, wow, I can't believe that happened? I'm sorry, I said, is there anything that surprised you when you were immersing yourself in your world that you created, and you go, wow, I can't believe that happened?
Yeah,
Sorry,
my second book was like that. it got a little bit darker than I thought I could ever go. And there's a lot that I cut out because I am a young adult book, so I had to reel it back in. But it helped me get to a place that was much darker than I thought that I could go to.
Yeah, I wrote a couple of dark scenes actually around world building. I talked about this before, but Garanol is one of my favorite places in my sequel called Dare. It's the one after Melkorka, and I had people message me after reading that they were having nightmares after getting through that chapter. And I didn't really realize that I'd gotten as dark as I had with that, but it's adult fantasy, so I didn't really feel too bad about it. But the world for themselves, they said it was so frightening to them. They were had shallow breath and were whispering to the characters to get the hell out of there, and then were having nightmares that night after reading it. And so that was kind of exciting for me, but I didn't realize it would go that deep into making this dark ruins in this forest, have that impact on folks.
Nice.
For me, it's my protagonist female. People when they read Love, and the comments that I've gotten back, besides the reviews are great. I have 10 reviews on it, and I have 2 non-reviews, which are reviews. The 2 non-reviews are basically people agreeing with someone else and then refusing to leave their own review, which is, I can't do anything about that. But the comments that I've gotten directly from people is that they really hate my protagonist. They hate her with a passion. They have no idea why she's even, why he's even with her. That's how horrible they feel she's treating him. When they get to the end of the book, they hate her even more until they read the second one in the series, and then they go, oh, wait a minute, why did I hate her? And then they start to realize that it's how relationships actually tend to work. And that's what shocked me the very first time that I penned it down was when I wrote my book Love. It's an actual true-to-life romance, which is, I know people have said it, but they go, oh, mine's a true romance book. Mine's real life. You're going through all the crap and shit, and you're wading through the disappointments. You're wading through the stress of giving up what you want for someone else. And I didn't realize I did that until I penned the last word on the book. And I thought, I'm writing a normal relationship. This is Bob, and he's with Sue, and they're happy. And this is what I thought I was writing. And then when you look at it, you're like, what? No, yeah, no. Why I would never date someone like that. And the truth is, we all have. And the truth is, in some cases, we are all still with the same person, no matter how bad they were. For some reason, we ended up with them, and now we're happy we're with them. All the pain and suffering paid off for us in the end. It doesn't for everybody, and that's what threw me off at the very end.
So, Joe, I don't know if I can.
I'm sorry, Josh.
I had a follow-up question. I was just curious from the panel, because I know for myself that sometimes there's certain aspects of my world that I spend a lot of time researching and trying to figure out how certain things work. For instance, I spent like 6 hours trying to figure out how they made tea in ancient China because I needed to have them be able to make tea in my book, and I didn't know how in the world they accomplished it. So are there things that you guys have found that in trying to really bring out that realism in your story, that authenticity, that you spent a lot of time having to dig deep and trying to figure out how exactly did this work?
Druid rituals. My urban fantasy series, in book 2 that will be released in July or August, I have a huge Druid ceremony, and I have no idea. I was raised in Santa Barbara, California, so I have no idea what Druids did. I had to spend time and time again. And when I sent it to a beta reader, I was so happy that he goes, this is exactly what my religion. He's a Druid. And I was like, oh, you're a Druid. And he goes, this is exactly what the religion is based on. This is exactly what happens. So digging down and finding the actual authenticity of the rituals and then putting a fantasy twist on it is something that's been really, really hard, I think.
For me, my first book, I was playing with herbs and spells, and I was really concerned at one point about someone wanting to try to make it themselves because I know how people are. And so I researched different herbs and saying if they would kill you, because I didn't want to have something in my book that would end up killing someone. Um, and actually, one of my readers' parent did say to me that the daughter wanted to go make the stuff, so I felt a little bit better that I at least made sure there was nothing that would make someone sick.
Stick with oregano.
Well, what's cool with that is the more research you do into the film you're writing or the subject you're tackling. Like for example, the first segment in Terror Tales involves Munchausen by proxy disorder, and researching that was really awesome when writing the character, because you read actual research and stuff from psychologists and things like that, and stories, and how behavior is. And when you know all that, and you can write the character, it makes it feel more real, and you can really have a lot of validation to your story and the subject matter you're trying to tackle, rather than just trying to base it off on a assumption or hearsay. And as far as dark places with writing and being a horror filmmaker and writer, with a lot of the stuff that I do, is what's great with that is you I don't know if you can go too far with horror and how dark you go. There was a film I did, M is for Malnourished, and it was for the ABCs of Death 2 competition. And with writing something like that, it was really kind of just based off of human nature, in the sense where people do some messed up shit to each other. And so that was kind of one of the inspirations for this story. And in a nutshell, a husband chains his wife in their kitchen, and he chains her up, and he tortures her basically over the course of so many days, and he's starving her. And so you see this degradation of her mentally and physically in her appearance, and the ending is always gets a reaction, because it's factual stuff, and there's like necrophilia and stuff kind of implied in there, and at the end. So yeah, without spoiling that story too much, but you can go to a dark place, and sometimes as you're writing, you go there and you're like, oh, this is great, and then you look back, it's like, whoa, I can't believe I went there. But it's great, and then it really pays off, like I said, when you're sitting there with an audience and watching it, and seeing them react.
I love that type of stuff. That's why I write dark fantasy. I mean, my short story I just wrote was Jack Sprat, and it tells the story of Jack Sprat and his wife Joan. We all know the nursery rhyme, Jack Sprat could eat no fat, his wife could eat no, or whatever. His wife could eat no fat, whatever. But it's essentially about him and his wife being cannibals, and they're kidnapping fairy tale girls and eating them.
Nice, I dig it. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and I make Jack Sprat also the same Jack as Jack and Jill went down the hill, and Jack falling down, and so he only speaks in nursery rhymes throughout the entire story, but it's my own play on all nursery rhymes.
That's really cool. It's like a twisted fairy tale world. I like that.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So, to wrap this up, guys, I want an answer from each of you. What do you love about world building, and what is the most frustrating aspect for you?
I honestly love the process of world building. I could build worlds every day. I've played Dungeons & Dragons for almost 20 years now of my life. Like I said, I started building the world that I write in now since I was 15 years old. My book for the Hawkhurst series that I wrote, I built that entire city and that entire world in about 48 hours with over 150 NPCs, all layers of the city, the religion, the noble houses, everything that fits within there. I just love the process of world building. Unfortunately, and I think that maybe Jen mentioned this a little bit, I have to make sure I don't get caught up in it because I wouldn't do anything else but world build. I think the most frustrating piece of it is that I can't share all of my world with my readers. And this is something that I have to tell a lot of new writers that are coming out, because you see that they're so interested in telling everyone about their world because they're so excited about their world, but the reader's only excited about the world if it impacts the character. And so, exciting piece about it, I love building it. The dissatisfying piece about it is I can't tell you everything because it's not all important to you.
I'll go next. For me, the most satisfying part about world building is basically getting lost. You know, one of the reasons why I love writing so much is because I can immerse myself into this whole new world where, you know, I'm basically God and anything I want can happen. So when I'm doing world building, whether it's for my romance novel or whether it's for my urban fantasy or my movie script, you know, I have the kill button, basically. You know, you're dead now. When I used to play D&D with people, when I play my RPG games online or when I do something like that, you know, and I play that healer, you know, I'm God, you're dead. I'm not gonna heal you. You know, I'm gonna do this. Um, and when with world building, it's really a really satisfying thing where you can go and say, no, I don't want them to be here now. They accidentally ended up over here in the desert. So now they're in the desert. You know, and being able to jump scenes that way is wonderful. The hard part about it is restraining myself from going overboard with so much world building that my characters themselves have no idea what's going on. Um, and yeah, there's that whole flexibility that I said earlier, you know, and that's really hard, you know, trying to maintain the level of plausibility versus exploring how far you can take things, and that right there is keeping that balance from my side.
I'd say what I love about the world building aspect of it is being able to create the world and having that control, and everything from, you know, being able to manipulate your audience, or, you know, putting pieces in there that, you know, hopefully, you know, trigger something with them emotionally. You can build a world as realistic as going out into the real world and do it. You can build it in an artistic manner. For example, Conflicted, a gothic romance that I did, a short film I did. There was some very personal stuff in there that I wrote into it, but I wanted to take an artistic approach and have it all shot in a dark room, and just had one can light just light the actors, and it was just one light above the actors the whole time, so they're shrouded in darkness, but they're lit by one light, and there was no audio to it, so it was told through visuals, and the actors being able to tell the story in that way, and the music was really beautiful to the tell as well. Um, but I love creating these worlds, because when I write, even though I do a lot of horror stuff, you know, I've done a lot of drama and romance and things like that. And when I write, I like to try and write where people can relate to something. Whether, you know, it's, you know, if I write about a relationship or something, and somebody watches it and they can relate to it. You know, like with my first film, I'll keep it brief, but what was really rewarding with that is my cinematographer for that film, he wrote me a message, and he's just like, wow, man, I'm at this point in my life right now with what your character is going through, and I can relate. And I really love that about world building, is building a world that you can bring people into, that you can touch them, and they can relate, and you have the creative freedom to express that and put that together however it comes about, whether it's in a dark room with a light shining down, or on the gritty streets of New York, or wherever it may be. What's frustrating? I think two things that's frustrating is always that voice in your head, you know, that's telling you, oh well, you know, maybe somebody won't relate to this, or they'll think it's this, or they'll think it's that, or what if you just start, you know, getting all these questions in your head, and then you get kind of try and talk yourself out of putting it out there, especially if you're the more vulnerable you are with your art and your writing. So that can get frustrating, but I think ultimately you get over that and you put it out there, and that's what you do as artists. You know, you want to get your stuff out there. And then if you're trying to create a decade or a period piece, of course, that's frustrating, you know, because you want to be as factual as possible, and it can take a lot of time, and it can get frustrating in that aspect. Yeah, there's a lot I can add to that, but that's kind of my take on it.
Mine is really similar. I just love being able to create a world that I would want to live in. And the stuff that I don't like the limitations I put on myself. the overthinking, like what will my reader like that? Am I going too far if I'm taking, this character to this place that my reader wouldn't want me to take him to? And I know, like in my second book, it was darker, and I was uncomfortable, and so were some of my readers. So hopefully, book 3, they'll understand why we had to get there. But yeah, overthinking is probably my biggest weakness.
Well, this is a great conversation about a great topic. I want to thank you all for being here and taking the time to do this with me. I want to go around the room one more time and just have each of you plug something and tell us who you are and where they can find you, because I think, and personally, quite frankly, I think everybody should go see Conflicted. That's such a beautiful short.
Thank you, Joe.
One of my all-time favorites, actually. I really love that short. It was really amazing. So that's my own personal plug. But why don't you start then, Jimmy, since I already led into
Yeah, absolutely. So absolutely, www.heartandfireproductions.com. You can find all of our work there and our projects on Facebook under Jimmy Lee Combs. Just type in my name. I post a lot of stuff there. A couple projects to keep an eye out for that we're doing, of course, is Terror Tales here at this shirt. Woo! That's our horror anthology, and you can find that on Facebook. Terror Tales Movie, as well as www.terrortalesmovie.com, and also our horror comedy web series called Bored as Hell, and it's a really funny, outrageous comedy web series. And again, you can find that on Facebook under Bored as Hell. And then things to keep an eye out for in the future that we want to start next is a supernatural action western called Spirit Reckoning, and I've gotten pretty deep into that script and very excited about that. And that'll be a western. John Woo meets Sergio Leone meets the horror genre is kind of what I'm billing it, and that's a lot to live up to, but that's something to keep an eye out down the road.
Yeah, don't put too much pressure on yourself.
I know, right? Exactly.
All right, Mr. Kubo.
Basically, I have my 2 romance books, Love and Kaoru in Love's Shadow. Something I must say, and I didn't think I had to say, but something that I must say. Kaoru in Love's Shadow, the title, it says loves and it has an S without an apostrophe. It's not supposed to have an apostrophe. It's the subject. It's an actual thing. It's not a possessive. It's not a possessive. Anyways, my urban fantasy, which is being re-released finally, the first book is out. It's called Memories. All of it can be found on Amazon. My website is still, I'm behind on updating a lot of stuff, but it's jinokubo.com, jinokubo.com. Find me there. Ask me questions. Ask me anything you want. My plug is this Tuesday I will be appearing on Back Porch Writer with Corey D. Miller, and during that time my books will be free. That means there's a free promotion on Amazon, so you can get the books for free. Check me out. Check out the podcast. You guys have a good one.
What is your podcast? Tell people. Come on.
It's on Tuesday.
What is it? What's the name?
The name is Back Porch Writer.
Oh no, your podcast.
Oh, my podcast. So my podcast. I completely forgot about that. Thank you, Joe. See, this is where I am right now. My podcast is called Outliers. People breaking the mold, and I do a podcast once a week. Unless I get backtracked, then it's a little bit later, but it usually happens on a Friday when I do the podcast. If it gets backtracked, it happens on a Monday. And my podcast, I talk about ways indies can help each other, and it's doing a shift right now. We're going to be talking about urban fantasy and actually fantasy worlds and stuff like that, and basically character development and going through that for the next couple of podcasts. And you can find me on Stitcher as well. I figured out how to get my podcast onto Stitcher. I don't know if it's any good, but that's where I am.
Are you on iTunes yet?
I have no idea.
Yeah, you and I were supposed to do that. Sorry about that. I'll get you there.
All right.
All right, Mr. Robertson.
Where to start at? You can find me all over the place. Google my name. You can find me, of course, on our website, www.crimsonedgepress.com. Through there, you can find links to our podcast, The Writer's Edge, or you can also find links to our book club on Facebook called the Crimson Edge Book Club. The podcast is also, of course, here on YouTube. We do live broadcasts. I've been trying to do about every 2 weeks, but we are skipping this week right now. The podcast is primarily for writers. The book club is primarily for readers. You can also find me on Twitter at Robertson Writes. Search for me on my Amazon. I also have my own personal YouTube where I talk about writing, I do some gaming, and I do all sorts of other shenanigans where you can catch up with me at. I don't know. Look for me on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way. Robertson Writes is WRITES, not your other way around. And just shoot me questions on there, shoot me messages, sign up for my newsletter. And there's a lot more coming down the pipe, so just stay tuned.
And in his last little video he did, he spoke Elvish. So if there's any Tolkien, for people who don't know, Mr. Robertson is a Tolkien fan to the T. Mm-hmm. And he spoke a little Elvish for all of us, which I thought was really, really cool. It was very interesting.
Yeah, by no means was it perfect because I don't really speak Elvish, but it was a lot of fun to do.
All right, Marnie.
Okay, you can find me on Amazon. You can find my lovely books. Yes, I did what I was told. I brought my books. And Facebook, Marnie Kate, author is probably the best way to find me. Twitter is Marnie _ Kate, so it's cat with an E on the end. Go to my website, www.marniekate.com. Send me messages, ask me questions. I love to answer questions. I will not purchase any of your products, though, so don't send me that way.
Very, very good. And I am Joe Compton. This is GoIndieNow. This was a live broadcast. We do these once a month. I pick a random Saturday and go. We may change the time, but so that I can get more panelists in here. But it will definitely. You can go to our website, GoIndieNow.com. You can go to our Facebook page, which is also GoIndieNow, and take a look, and I post everything there. Subscribe to this YouTube channel, and you'll get more videos like my monthly show. I do a monthly show that drops. The next episode, episode 4, will drop on Monday, actually. And everything I do, including this live broadcast, I turn into an audio podcast, which you can find on iTunes if you search GoIndieNow, and Podbean. I am goindienow.podbean.com. Podbean is the name, and you definitely want to go check those out and listen to those. I know there's a lot of people who like to who commute, who like to listen to audio podcasts, so I do turn all of these into audio podcasts for those folks. And I wrote a book called Amongst the Killing, which I know I put on the back burner a lot, so I'm going to mention it. I have written a book. And I just want to thank everybody for being here. And we'll see you next month, everybody. Have a good one.
Awesome. Thanks for having us, Joe.
All right.
Thanks, Joe.
All right, guys.
Bye.
Bye.